It's not on. Okay,
We're live.
we are live. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm on today with TJ Martinell, a young author who I just recently discovered. I don't know, a couple weeks ago. I guess first time we ever talked. I just finished his novel called "Men Who Walk Alone." Correct, the title?
That's correct. Yeah.
And he's written several novels. He is also a podcaster. He also was worked as a journalist. He is an avid hiker. He also happens to live here in beautiful Washington State, and the nice part, completely away from all the leftist nutcases in Seattle. So anyway, TJ, tell us a little bit more about yourself, the things I missed or whatever.
Yeah. So I'm a Washingtonian native. I grew up in Bellevue, which is a suburb of Seattle, Washington, and I went to school there. Went to college in the state, and I've been in journalism since I was in high school. I started out at my high school newspaper as the news editor eventually, and just worked my way through. And I wasn't planning on going into writing until I got into college, and that I actually started out writing fiction before I started doing any kind of reporting as a career option, because I was getting increasingly frustrated with the types of characters that I was seeing in cartoon, whether they were cartoons, TV shows, movies, and things like that, and particularly with the male characters, they were not living up to the ideas of what I saw as masculine qualities that we would later. I didn't quite realize at the time, but looking back, I realized that. So instead of after a few days of just thinking about it, I decided I was going to write my own books so I would have those characters. And at first, it started out as a hobby that I was doing while I was going to school, but then I started reading a lot more literature. I was reading just everything from Leo Tolstoy to All Quiet on the Western Front. And I started taking it more and more seriously to the point where I thought, this is something that I might actually be interested in doing. And then I ended up becoming the news editor of my university newspaper. And I almost became fanatical or obsessed with it. It was consuming all my time, but I was loving every second of it because it was really tapping into that curiosity and investigative interest that I have with life. And I kept going through that even after I graduated from school, and I eventually got a job in newspapers in the Seattle area, and I've been doing that ever since. Now I live, like you were saying, in the Cascades, and over the last couple of years, I've been trying to get my books published, and I've discovered, as many people could tell you, the traditional publishing route changed drastically over the last 15 years. And so I finally just decided to self-publish myself, and that's what I've been doing recently. I've just felt like that there's not a publisher, at least for right now, that may change, that's really interested in doing this kind of work. And so in addition to what I did in college is I was writing lots and lots and lots of novels. And then instead of trying to get them published, I would just put the draft away and move on to the next project, because somehow I knew at the age of 22 or 23, there was this epiphany where I realized I was not going to have that amount of free time ever again in my life. And so I decided to pack in as much as possible. And I missed out, granted, on a lot of opportunities to do other stuff. I really didn't acquire a whole lot of other skills. I have a friend who just knows so much about home improvement, and now that I have a house, I wish I knew those knew how to do that. Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing. I'm trying to. That's what I'm moving on to now at some point. But that's all I was doing. So, which also kind of frustrates me, because I've probably packed in hundreds and hundreds of hours into learning how to write and doing all this stuff. And people just think that it's a natural talent and that I had a knack for it without any kind of effort, which is definitely not the case. My original writing was not good. I did not do well in high school when it came to writing. But I also think that it had something to do with my education as well.
Public school?
I actually, believe it or not, I went to a private school for 13 years, from preschool to 8th grade. And then I ended up going to high school. But I guess in some sense, it's hard because to say what the difference is, because for me, the private school upbringing was very different in some ways, but at the same time, they're still going to teach writing the same way. They're just not going to use maybe the same examples, but they're still going to. The approach to it was not the way I understood it, and I think for most teachers, it's going to be a template where you write just in a way that they tell you to write. And the thing about writing is that it's subjective in a lot of ways, prose and style and all that. And people are just looking for what I don't know. There was somebody I knew who took had the exact same high school English class as I did, same teacher. He could not write to save his life. He got A's and I got a C. And I asked him how he got an A, and he said, I just wrote whatever the teacher told me.
Yeah, well, that's always true. I mean, even in college, it's kind of like that. You never want to be combative with the. Well, I mean, there are some decent instructors, teachers out there that appreciate it, but for the most part, people who wind up teaching, I think the people who really have a knack for it don't stay in it. They get
frustrated because I did meet and I did have teachers who were very inspiring. And I think part of that was, it wasn't really what they were teaching. It was just, they really got, like, one teacher in my history class, I was reading so many history books and was so far ahead of the class. She literally just put me in the corner and said, read whatever you want, because I was passing every single test without, and I was just being a distraction to the rest of the class because I was so far ahead. And she understood that the best way to teach was just to get out of my way, academically and intellectually speaking, because my knowledge of history was beyond what she knew. And she did the same thing for other people when she was teaching math, because this is when the same teacher was teaching all this other different stuff. When a couple of boys I knew had surpassed her in math knowledge, she just said, "Here, go read the math book, and I'm not going to tell you what to do, as long as you're getting good grades, right?"
As long as you're the material. Well, can I ask you? Can we talk about the novel, the one I just read? I just finished it a couple of days ago, but I read the first as soon as you sent it to me. I read like half of it that night, and then I was kind of busy for several days, and I think it was only 6 days ago that you sent it to me. But
yeah, I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
Well, no, I mean, I read. I mean, I go through a couple bucks a week, so, but. Let's just talk about this novel. Like, why did you choose it? Now, let me just say something about the novel. By the way, the link to his Amazon page, to his author page, is in the description, and also his Twitter link, his personal website. That's all in the description, so you can go there. You can look what we're talking about. So anyway, in this novel, it takes place during the Depression, and it's in a town that's it's a fictional town, Beverly, is it?
Oh, no, it's a real town.
Oh, is Beverly? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It takes place in the town of Beverly, and during the Depression, and I think it's either 34 or 33, I forget. But I mean, you jump back in time. There's just flashback sequences in the novel. Yeah. But a couple things stood out to me about this book. But one is you kill a lot of people in this book. I mean, what's up with that? You got like, I thought you were like this really nice guy. You seem, you're a very affable person. And I'm reading his novel, man, like, and I'm like, people are getting their throats slit. They're being shot with revolvers. You had entire groups of people being mowed down with Tommy guns. I mean, it was intense, man.
The one thing I would say about the book is it's not intended to be a literary fiction or within the realm of. When I was originally writing the book, I was actually trying to write a book about almost like superheroes, about people with superhero abilities. And when I finally started working on the final draft of the book, I was thinking, okay, the tone of this book is like pulp fiction, pulp noir. Of the times, and one of the inspirations, at least visually, was The Shadow. That was that old radio serial.
Yeah, that's what Batman was based on.
Yeah, and so you have these guys who are doing things, and almost like Batman as well. I mean, there's no Batman has no superpowers, but he's still outside the bounds of like the real world. There's no way a guy could do the things that he's doing, but it doesn't get in the way of enjoying the story or accepting the fact that it's supposedly taking place in the real world. And that's what I tried to do with this book as well. I didn't want any magic or supernatural stuff. I wanted it to just be about men and ordinary people just doing extraordinary things. It kind of reminded me of that line from and one of the inspirations for the amount, I would say the amount of violence, was watching the Boondock Saints when I was around that age.
Oh yeah, I remember that's a fun movie. I love that movie.
Yeah, I think that was one of those movies that really tapped into this natural desire for for justice, to see bad people punished. And I think that was also what frustrated me in a lot of the movies and stuff I was watching, where you see the bad guy. It's like the bad guy gets away with it in a way, where there's not that true sense of satisfaction of seeing that justice is served and the good guys win out. Now, maybe they don't have to, walk off into the sunset with Grace Kelly, like Gary Cooper, but they still win, and you get that that satisfaction of watching them go through a hard an ordeal, but still come out through the end, and also without losing sight of their goal and just being completely unfazed by the odds against them. That was really what I was thinking of. But the amount of violence, I wasn't really thinking about. Wasn't really thinking about it when I.
You're trying to tell me this just comes naturally to you. Huh?
Well,
one thing. No, because one thing that like stuck out about it was there's several robberies that happen. Robberies that happen, or people get held up and stuff like that. Like in your book, people just don't get robbed; they have to rob them and then shoot them afterwards. I mean, it's like they're really, really bad guys.
Yeah, it's and then I had been watching The Godfather, and I was also watching a lot of 1930s films at the time. And what's funny is the book was originally not set in the 30s. I decided to do that for various reasons, and one of them was, ironically enough, I was working on this book in 2006 and 7, and it took place in a second Great Depression, and this was right on the cusp of the Great Recession. And it took place in the modern world because it was part of a different book series that I ended up just splitting them all off into their own books. So there's another book that took place in the same time period. It's its own separate story. But yeah, I thought that was funny. And then I finally just decided to set it in a historical period, because that way I wouldn't have to make everything up. And I think that was one of the difficulties and why I actually decided to set it in an actual city that exists, because it was a lot easier to create the sense of that this is an actual place, because I could just base it off of what was there. So I did a little bit of historical research on the town of Beverly. I managed to come up with old newspaper articles, and like, by the way, nothing that I describe in the book happened. Like, there was no vigilante. There was no, I was just trying to get a visual sense of the town. So I was reading about newspaper articles. I was looking up old historical photos of different streets that I was describing, trying to get a sense of this East Coast town and the New England area. And then I came across in one newspaper article the word Shingleville. And so that's what the inspiration for the town, like the slum area, the ghetto area of Shingleville, was that.
Yeah, well, what was this? Why did you have to put the Irish in Shingleville and not the Italians? As an Irishman, I kind of was offended by that. I mean, I'm like, well, how can you put the wops in there? When you put all the mix in there, I'm like, whoa, what's this about?
Right. I think it was because I was just trying to figure out where to put it, and I couldn't. The book had already been written, and I already had the Irish in a different part of town than the Italians, and so I couldn't really know where. It just made sense to put there. And by the way, I'm also Italian. Like, parts of me is Italian and parts of me is Irish, so a little bit of self conflict over which side to take in the feud.
So you're a Mick Wop. All right.
Right. No, I'm more like also like Tom Hagen from The Godfather. German Irish.
Yeah. Do you remember that great scene from The Godfather where when he goes to Hollywood to meet with the reporter, the producer of the film, and he called him like a guinea wop or something like that, and he goes, actually, I'm German Irish. He goes, all right, well then you kraut Mick.
Yeah, that's another thing I liked about this book is I wanted characters who just spoke without, and I wasn't trying deliberately to be politically incorrect, but then I was reading a lot of different books from the 50s, and also I think it was James Ellroy who wrote L.A. Confidential, which was, by the way, a great film as well. I think the film was actually better than the book, in my opinion.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a novel. I love the movie though.
Yeah, and in the book they have that just unfiltered talk. Like I wanted to depict a period where people just said what was ever on their minds instead of it being. And I think that's what frustrated me about a lot of films, and I would just say stories nowadays. People aren't really talking the way that they may talk in real life. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way people talk now, but the idea that everybody's using proper etiquette when referring to people of different ethnic groups that they're not getting along with in the same neighborhood is kind of it just defies belief. And also during that period of time, that's when you had the Irish and the Italian gangs in the 30s. Now, maybe they weren't in Massachusetts; they were mostly in Chicago and New York and in other areas. But that was also kind of the high mark of that conflict going on, because you just had so many different groups immigrating to the U.S. and going into the big cities. So I was also taking advantage of that, but I was also watching a lot of 1930s films with James Cagney and other great actors from that period. And so that was also part of it, especially the ones that were pre-production code, that just the unfiltered, uncensored way of talking.
Yeah, I noticed that, like, there's a lot of dialogue in this novel, a lot of talking, and you kind of create the language of the Irish, like
Yeah.
it's written phonetically, not proper, because the one of the main characters, which Sean, is it Sean Blood?
Yeah, Sean Blood.
We won't say who he is because we don't want to, but he's not the protagonist, but he is a main uh, a main character. And when he's talking to what was I'm trying to remember them. There's so many names of so many characters. Like I kind of got confused a little bit, because there's the commissioner, there's the chief of police, there's the detective. There was, what was the guy named Elroy? What was his position again?
Detective Malone was the one, and
Malone's the protagonist. He's the detective. He's like a old school detective that is as honest as you could be in this really corrupt city at this time. And he is the protagonist, and he's the one that you write in first person. You also shift narratives, or perspectives, when you're having different when it's focusing on different characters. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and with Malone, he kind of fits, or he fits the, when I was starting out to write a novel, or when I was first starting out as a fiction writer, he was the kind of character I wanted to create. I wanted to create a character who, he's honest and he's not perfect. He's got flaws, but he's also a man who's, as the title suggests, he's a man who walks alone. He's a man who's willing to go his own way and do his own thing, even when no one else is with him, because that's just what you do. He's he doesn't have the cleanest mouth in the world, like I think none of the characters do, but his heart, his integrity is intact, and that's the only thing that matters. And I think that that's also, it kind of goes into what bothers me about modern society and culture, is that we have this incredible obsession with being polite or nice, but we're not interested in character in ways that would traditionally matter, like loyalty and honesty and duty. Like, the guy believes in his duty as a police officer. Now he comes up with creative ways to fulfill that role and to do it the right way, but he doesn't lose sight of that throughout the book. And he's also completely unfazed with what's going on. He certainly gets angry, and he's not Superman, but he's not self-pitying.
No, actually, not at all, actually. And he doesn't really bitch about the fact that he is alone, per se. He actually, it seems like you wrote it, that he's quite comfortable with it. Even in, the very beginning of the book, and there's not really giving anything away, we find out his wife left him, and that is kind of like, he's okay with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily give away his motive, but he has a very strong personal motive, and his loyalty is actually not even to the police department necessarily, and it's not even to there's a greater loyalty above even his wife and the police department, and that's to one of his family members, for reasons that you'll find out when you read the book. But that's partly, and I'd say the major driver, is that he's out of a sense of duty that goes above all those other ones. And so that's what I think is his essence, is this sense of duty to family, over, and living up to, and I think it also, living up to the legacy of someone who's come before him, and understanding that he has an obligation to live up to those same ideals.
Can I ask you, was these characters in the novel, like, there's Sean, there's the Malone, the detective. Is it Malone, right? That's the detective's name. Yeah. And then there's also, I'm trying to think of the character Noble. were any of these people inspired by real life guys, fictional guys? Were any of these characters your avatar in any way? Um, could you talk about that maybe?
You know, that's interesting. I thought about it because somebody was asking me when I was talking about the novel with them. They said, you know, which one of them, who are they based off of? And I honestly don't. If I did, I don't recall, and I don't think so. I think that they all were based on archetypes that I'd already pictured. I kind of saw uh, Detective Malone as being like just your old school guy who's a bit cynical, but underneath it all, he's got a sense of nobility or at least this integrity that he has to hide behind this exterior of being kind of almost a shady guy just because you got to do that to survive. I think it was based on maybe just watching older films or seeing uh, stuff like that, but I can't really think. And if I did, it started out that way. Maybe they were based on somebody I knew, or they're just the way they were. But then it slowly changed, and I kept refining because this book went through so many revisions over time. Because I started out writing this when I was 21. I didn't know anything about, or no, gosh, I think it was actually 19 when I first started writing it, and I finished it a couple of years later. But I just went through so many revisions because I was still refining it and trying to change the dialogue and make it better. And you know, watching any movie with Humphrey Bogart, particularly The Maltese Falcon or something like that, where you
Oh
or
yeah.
when you hear this dialogue and you're thinking, I want to write a line that witty in this book. And then also maybe reading um, some good pulp fiction from that time period.
Yeah, well, it definitely is that genre, the the hard boiled detective, from that time period. There's something that's there's something, it's really Americana in a way. You know what I mean? That uh, I'm not really
Yeah.
articulating my
Yeah,
point.
I know you mean. It's almost like when we walk into an American diner nowadays, we have this sense of what we're going to expect, and it's usually from this time period because for whatever reason, I've got my theories. I think because just the everything about that, you know, let's say starting from the 30s and going maybe to the 50s era, just the style, the architecture, the cars, that feel um, in the culture. Just when people think of Americana, that's what they think of. They think of that time period for whatever reason. I'm not entirely certain, but that's I think also what inspired me to set it in that time period because it just everything about like the music, the clothes, it's iconic, and people who have never watched any of these movies will know exactly what's going on. All you have to do is see a guy, the silhouette of a man wearing a fedora, and you know exactly what that book's going to be about. It's going to you associate it with a certain type of story.
Yeah, a cop in a trench coat, and right there, and it's also, well, it's also a great way, like, for writers to not have to get overly verbose in the descriptions of the
Right.
time period, because everybody already kind of comes in kind of knowing what's going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you don't have to like overly describe everything. So in that way, it helps. You don't have to spend all this time just well, because there's a famous expression for writers, show me, don't tell me.
Right, right.
And
That was really Hemingway, and I'm that's one thing I've been trying to do over the years is spend less time writing about stuff that either the reader's not going to be interested in, or summarizing it in a way that they're going to get what they need without bogging down the details. Because one thing I didn't realize this at the time when I was 19, but I've really come to appreciate and just accept it. The readers today have very limited time attention spans, and they have to be the pacing of the book has to be like constant action with very little you know the momentum has to stay a certain speed, or else people are going to get off the ride. Because like the opening scene of a book, I didn't think about this then when I wrote it, and I ended up writing it this way. But you have to start out with action at the very beginning that keeps them wanting to turn the pages. Because if you don't have cliffhangers, people are they're going to just put it aside and do something else. You're competing with many more um, uh, I would just say entertainment sources than somebody 100 years ago.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with that, and the attention span. You're not the first author I've spoken to that's, I don't want to say complained about it. I mean, some do because they They love the form of the novel instead of the, maybe they prefer it more to the to short stories or essays or something like that. People really love to write novels, and people are just not reading them the way they used to. I mean, well, first off, that's a good point to transition on. I understand now you are writing short stories. You just recently had one published, or is about to be published. That's correct?
Yeah, so I wrote a short story that was published by Terror House Magazine. That's headed up by a fellow journalist, Matt Forney. He's living in Hungary now, and it's called Seattle Nice. And it takes place obviously in the city of Seattle and it concerns a native of that city who's been trying to over the years afford to stay there, to live there because of just all the constant change. And now that story was actually based on a real life conversation that I had with somebody and an interaction I had with somebody in the town. So I, the critical part of the story I changed, but just the 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 inspiration from it was definitely there's a little bit of the real in that. And I was really happy with the way that story turned out, and I'm planning to do more. He's actually Terror House Magazine is going to be publishing a story of mine, I think this week, that has to do with corporate censorship. And I'm working on another short story, or actually, I just submitted another one to them. And so I think that that's something I'm going to be shifting towards at some point in the near future, is just working on short stories, because that's something some people are going to read. They have the attention span. And to be honest, my time to write a full length novel, we're saying 100,000 words, that's like me getting up every single day and writing for 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon every single day, and churning out, or maybe it takes me 3 months. But if I wrote 1,000 words a day, it would take me about 3 months to write a novel. And then you got to go edit it, and you got to do all. I mean, I don't think people are fully aware of the amount of work that goes into taking a idea of a novel and actually writing the book. And this is if you're trying to get it right or do it well. If you're just if you're writing a book with every cliche in the book, doesn't take any effort at all. And I think that that's the frustration for a lot of writers, is they like being able to put a lot of effort into it, but then they realize that nobody's going to end up reading it. Whereas I think what also frustrates them is they look at people who are not writers, but they are good at marketing themselves, and they know that people are just interested in the fast food literature.
Well, yeah. Like I always think of, I don't know the name of the author, but she wrote what was it, 50 Shades of Grey?
Yeah, it was like E.L. James or something like that. And the thing is it's low hanging fruit to criticize, because it's just one author. But yeah, I mean, the amount of money that's been sold off of that book, and I'm sure that somebody's going to go in and say, well, that's what people who kind of worship the market and whatever the results are, and say that's what the people want. I get that, and that's relevant if you're a writer who's trying to see it as a business where you want to make money full time. And I'm kind of been on between the fence on that, because I've always just wanted to write my own books. I didn't write a lot of these books for other people. I wrote them for myself. But then I thought, people might be interested in reading them, and so I decided to eventually just self-publish them and see what would happen. And at some point, I'm trying to shift over towards writing what's in demand. I think the problem has been finding a niche market where the type of writing that I'm doing is demanded by the readers in that market, and it's not an easy market to find. And that's what makes me like, I was really excited when I heard about Forney's Terror House Magazine, because I feel like that's a publication that understands the kind of writing that I do, and they are appealing to the type of people who are going to read the type of stuff that I write. Because before, I think the problem is it's such a big ocean. You have to go find your readers, or they have to find you. And if you're not very good at being found or having people find you, then you can be the best writer in the world. You can write a great novel. And that's one thing, I can't remember who it was, but there was a famous author who was being asked what he was so concerned about. And he goes, how many great writers have written books that have never gone anywhere? Like, nobody's ever read them. And we may never read them, because it's just either they've published and nobody's reading it. I don't know. It's the saturation of the market. And I understand the beauty of having anybody being able to self-publish through Amazon, but at the same time, there are downsides to that.
Yeah, well, I think self-publishing is good now, and a couple reasons for that. well, one, it just allows more authors that I'd never be exposed to. I can find out, like authors like yourself.
Right.
And also, even those who do go to the traditional route of getting it published by a mainstream publisher, these publishers don't have budgets. Like they'll have a couple of, they'll sign contracts with a couple of really well-known authors, and pretty much their entire marketing budget goes into pushing those books.
Right.
And the other ones, they don't. Even if you do get a mainstream publisher to publish it, they don't really spend any money to promote those books.
Yeah, that is very true, and that's worth pointing out, is that even if you go, I think for people who are not familiar with how the process works, so just walk with me on this one. After spending countless hours, outlining the book, right, developing the characters, writing the book, editing the book, you've dedicated it. Now you have to go figure out a way to write a just killer query letter and synopsis of the book to a literary agent. And then you've got to do that to countless literary agents and just throw it out there. And then months later, if you're lucky, you'll get a response and they may ask for more of the manuscript. And then you send it back, and then you got to wait even longer. And meanwhile, you're having to juggle all the different all the other literary agents who may be interested, and you got to let them know when you've decided to go with another agent for the book. Then you sign on with them to represent you. Then they get to go try to convince a publishing house to publish your book. And then after going through all that, then you've got to go. You may have to submit to editing, where they go, and this is the part that really just made me decide to do self-publishing. They may not like a character. One of the editors may decide, oh, we want to make this more like this. We want to make it to represent more of our values as a publishing house. And you may have to compromise with them on some of your story that you actually feel very deeply on. And that's what one publisher told me. He said, if you're not willing to make major edits in a book, then you should not go through a traditional publisher. And then after all that, going through all that, you have them put out a book, your book, that may have just as much of a budget behind it as you would have yourself if you decide to self-publish. The only difference is, it may be in a bookstore somewhere, and it'll have the publisher's name on the book somewhere, so that you can say it was published by a traditional publishing house. And so that is the downside to that. And that and there was always vanity publishers back in the day where you would just pay someone a lot of money and then they would publish your book. I think that's what, I can't remember if there was any famous people who did that, but that's one route that people used to have. Now you can do it for free, and the amount of cost going into it is down. I think the downside is for people where it's really hurt people is, I would say, someone like me I'm more of a writer than an author in terms of marketing. That's one area I'm trying to learn how to do better, but if I went through a traditional publisher, I would not do well either if I was going to just be put off to the side. I would only, if I was one of those guys who they decided this book was going to be a bestseller and they wanted to put a lot of money behind it, I would do well. But if they're not going to make it worth my while, then there's no point. I might as well just self-publish myself. That way I have not only control over the royalties, and also the possibility that somebody wanted to make a movie over, do the movie option over something like that. But also they don't get to change any of the story in a way that I don't like.
Or even like the title, like you just reminded me of something. I remember this years and years ago. I used to be a fan of Jay Leno. He used to host the Tonight Show.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book years ago, and it was titled "Leading with My Chin." But that was the title that it was forced on him by the publisher. He wanted to call the book Road Tales, and the reason, TALES, because it was supposed to be about, the early days, him and comedians, they'd all, the way they work is, they travel the country the whole time, and they're staying in a lot of times in these small towns and these really crappy little one-star motels, that have bed bugs and, that whole kind of thing. Yeah. But they, the author didn't, the publisher kind of said, no, we're going to call it Leading with My Chin. They put this big mug, because he had that famous chin, boxer's dream chin. And, that was pushed on him. So yeah, you give up so much freedom when you go with the traditional publisher. But if they're willing to put the money behind it, it's worth it. Right. So I think that a lot of people should maybe self-publish one book, maybe their first novel, unless they have some or they know someone in the business that can get them published. They have a rich daddy and do like what you call vanity publishing. I never heard that expression before. Then get it vanity published, and then you can get it. Someone else is gonna be willing to invest in you because they're gonna say, oh well, this guy already has an established audience. So
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Speaking of book title changes, how much do you know about Errol Flynn?
um, other than he was an actor, I don't.
So he got into a little bit of trouble over these two teenage girls accused him of what would indiscretions, and there's this big case over it, and it led to the term "in like Flynn." And so Errol Flynn. And so when he was going to write his autobiography, he wanted to name it "In Like Me," and the publisher said no, no way. So he ended up changing it to "My Wicked Wicked Ways." Um, he was a rogue and a scoundrel in real life. I actually met, believe it or not, when I was working at this is just some of the stories that I encountered throughout my life. I was at a selling shoes at a sporting goods store, and I came across this old lady we ended up talking somehow about Errol Flynn, and she was talking about a time when she was, I think, 17 or 18 when she ran into him, and he was trying to like pick her up and take her on his yacht, and she
Wow,
said, yeah, he was a notorious womanizer. So, which is how the title. But yeah, I was thinking that would have been a much funnier title. I think more reflective of Errol Flynn. But of course, the publisher's not gonna bring that down on him. But yeah, what the situation is with self publishing now? We'll see what happens in the as things move on. I think we're going much like with the journalism industry itself. I think we're going through a massive transitory period and transition towards some other type of business model, and it has yet to be seen what that's going to look like.
Yeah, well, I think it's an exciting time though. I think for new authors though. Like I said, I like this kind of self-publishing thing because I'm a reader and it affords me an opportunity to discover writers like yourself and others. A quick note: we're I'm planning on doing a live stream with yourself and three other fiction authors, and it's kind of going to be a roundtable. We're going to promote it and see if we can take questions from members of the chat. So it'll be well promoted. So should be a good vibe. And I'm kind of interested in hearing about the way different authors approach the writing process, because I know every author is kind of unique that way, and how that kind of works. So I hope it's. I plan for it to be fun for not just those listening, but also for those who are engaging in it, and hopefully maybe you guys will get to network, because all of you are both. I think everybody on there has been both published. Several of them have been published by publishing. The traditional route as also done self-publishing. So
Right.
I think that'll be fun.
One thing I would add is, you are right. There's a lot of books. I'm like that comes to mind. Like I can't imagine Aaron Clary's books being published by by any kind of mainstream publisher.
I can't imagine anything mainstream with Aaron.
Totally, and I think that's the value of that is you get an honest voice where it's somebody who's just talking about the way things are. And that kind of ties back to the type of books and characters I like writing. As far as protagonists, for the most part, I like people who just tell it the way they see it, who speak honestly. And another books that come to mind is, say, Rollo Tomasi's books, the Rational Man and all that. I couldn't imagine. I mean, the books are incredibly popular, and I'm sure that they're selling really well for the niche market that he has. But I still couldn't see those books being published by a mainstream publisher today. And so you want to think, and something I definitely appreciate living in this time period is having access to that kind of information, whether it's Aaron's stuff or whether it's another author who's published stuff, where it gives us information that we would not hear, and basically in truth that we would not hear elsewhere, because it's not considered. It's almost like there's the stuff that you're allowed to say in polite society and mainstream society, that and also just because of the way our society is structured today compared to say back 70 years ago when they would just be more frank in what they would have to say. You have to dig really deep to hear people say what they actually think.
Yeah, well, the thing about like say Rollo and Aaron is they're nonfiction authors. They're they're giving advice, so
Right.
it's a very different model and way of writing. I mean, I'd argue that that is easier to do because if you're writing nonfiction, you're going to write about what you know already, unless
Right.
someone's hiring you to write, about something. So you're going to pick a topic that uh, that you know about or have this strong interest in, and so it's going to come naturally, and then you just got to have to explain it. So I think it's a lot, so like for example, Rollo is a very prolific blogger, and it seems like just writing to him comes very naturally about these things because he spent so much time thinking about them.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting. What I was thinking of is just the content of what's being discussed and the arguments that are being made that are in many ways almost borderline heretical, and especially as a society keeps changing the way it does, to where I mean, you think about stuff that was said 20 years ago that was considered to be um, almost edgy, and now it's almost boring. I think that that's the struggle of a lot of different artists from that time, whether they were writers or comedians or whatever. They're no longer extreme. They're no longer the edgy people. They're now just as boring and as safe, so to speak, as their mom and dad.
Well, but what about this whole movement we have now, where everything has to be, safe space and not assuming gender and all that kind of stuff.
I
So
I think that that is the safe space thing. I think is actually as crazy as it sounds, it's the result of people who have never been exposed to ideas that are different from their own. They've never been it's kind of makes me think of, imagine somebody never actually boxed another person, like boxing, let's say. They trained or whatever, or they were just taught about boxing, but they never actually boxed anybody. And then they went up against the best, you know, or they went up against anybody. They're not used to actually dealing with a human. They never did sparring sessions when as part of
right,
their boxing training. And then they go up against somebody who's actually boxed. Well, they're gonna not be very good if the other person's especially had to defend themselves. Or to use another example, somebody who grew up in a neighborhood where they had to constantly defend themselves to just either get to school, or they had to deal with a bully or whatever, and that taught them to be tough and hardened and learn how to take care of themselves, as opposed to somebody who's gone through their entire life not being challenged, and not just physically, but just uh, in terms of their worldview and their perception of the world. Well, now they get outside of the school system, and you're surrounded by people who think differently than you. So merely disagreeing with them, they don't know what to say. It's a shattering of this idea, because they've never they literally, you can go through, if you believe certain things, you can go through your entire life without ever meeting somebody else that holds a different view than you. So your views are presumed accepted universally. And so these safe spaces are a way for people to protect their sense of reality, because once you accept that you're wrong, it starts creating this I guess crisis of some kind, where they start wondering, what else do I believe that's wrong, or how do I even know that what I believe is real? And then you start spending all this time trying to. I think that that's one of the biggest problems a lot of people have when they discover something that they've believed for so long is not no longer true. It causes them to question everything else, and and causes an existential crisis.
well, let me ask you this about your political beliefs. I don't know how much of this you want to share and how much of it you want to keep private. Remember, the internet is forever. So, but is like now that you're going to concentrate more on writing short stories and possibly essays, and I know you also do a podcast, by the way. That, like, I'll repeat, the links are below. What do you plan on focusing on the future? Like, what do you, for your podcast and your short stories writing slash essays? What's going to be going on with that? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So the short stories that I've been working on, and that I'm planning on hopefully having the next one published, deal with corporate censorship, and they're dystopian and Orwellian, but they I think one of my hopes is that people will read this and think this isn't as crazy as it sounds. It's not that far away from what we're seeing today. You just have to take the premise of the arguments being made to justify what we see today and just keep going with it, because you go to the inevitable conclusion of what that is. What's funny is I for me, in one sense, politics is my job because that's part of my work, and it's been part of my work for forever, because you obviously have to deal with the political world when you're being a reporter. So I don't see it as it's not something that I actually don't like talking about a whole lot with a lot of people. Um, like when I go to social events and people want to talk about politics or whatever is going on in the news, I actually don't want to talk about it. And one of the reasons is because most people don't say anything particularly original. They just parrot one side or the whichever side that they've heard, and they I don't think they've given a lot of thought to it themselves, and it's almost as if they're just expressing or conveying to others, this is what I believe. I'm not quite sure why, but I don't feel the need to let everybody
Well,
know.
I have a theory on that. Is sorry to interrupt you, but I've experienced what you're saying, and what I believe it is, because now everybody is in their own little echo chambers, and because you can kind of customize what you're exposed to on social media. So you'll only, like, if you're on the right, you're only going to be surrounding yourself with, no one really follows people who, let's say on Twitter or whatever, or YouTube, subscribe to channels of people that have a contrary opinion to their own, politically speaking. So everybody just stays within their own little echo chamber, and it just constantly gets reinforced. And because of that, the polarization between the two ideas gets further and further and further apart, because they're both
Right.
just,
Yeah.
kind of spinning out of control, so that the gap between them just is going to organically grow. And that's how I see this.
And that is absolutely true, and it's absolutely scary, because I actually am the opposite of most people in that I don't want to say I enjoy it, but I do have a natural fascination with reading the material of people who I don't agree with, who hold views that are completely opposed to mine in every way, shape, or form. And one of the reasons is goes back to my curiosity. I want to know what these people are thinking and how they think. And another part of it is utilitarian almost. I want to be exposed to different ideas in order to bolster and uh, develop further what I believe. And if they say something that I can't counter it, even to myself, I'm reading part of their argument and I'm able to counter it. If I can't do that, then I got to do more research and I got to develop my opinion. And that's actually how I've changed in some of my views over time. I was reading stuff from people who I didn't agree with, but I started thinking a lot about what they were saying. I thought, you know what, that's a my opposition is based on emotion, not logic or reason. So I need to change that. And so I'm always listening to what people say, but a lot of times I'm reading their stuff and it's completely removed from reality. It's almost as though I don't understand what they're talking about, a completely different reality than what I see on the ground. And it is because people are not listening to what the others have to say. And we're kind of at this point where I don't see that changing, because, or going back, because then people would have to completely re-examine what they believe. And after a certain number of years, people are entrenched in what they believe and they won't go back. Even when, and this is what I guess why we see people react so badly to discovering someone else disagrees with them. They're terrified that that person will say something that will cause them to realize deep down that they're wrong, but they've passed the point of no return for themselves where they're willing to go do the hard work to change their lives. I mean, imagine if you've built your entire life's purpose around a certain cause or belief or ideology, and then someone's able to dismantle it. What do you do?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean by that. I have a theory on this, like from a psychological perspective, that if you get that invested in an idea or a cause, an ideology, over time it becomes inseparable from your own identity, your entire sense of self, your
Right.
ego. So it is no longer really possible to divorce yourself from it. It would be like asking you to cut off an arm or a leg. You're just not going to
Right.
do it.
Right. And
Um,
that's what I think. When people ask me about politics, I have done. I work very hard to divorce or separate what's going on in politics from my own personal self. and who I am and what I am. It's not, I have certain beliefs, but that has nothing to do with what some political person's doing or what some political leader said or what's going on as far as who's in office or anything like that. One of my things that I like to remind myself and what I would advise other people is you got to come up with your own goals and ambitions in life and you got to pursue them regardless of what's going on in the political world. You've got to, you obviously would prefer it to be a certain way, but you can't sit there and just wait like and live vicariously through what's going on in politics because you one have no control over it and then which means that you're not responsible for it either way. And it's also it's not a very good I don't see anything admirable or worthy at the end of the day for you to and it doesn't you don't do anything you just sit there and we kind of see that today where everybody's emotionally reacting to everything they hear instead of being proactive. And that goes back to what I want or I admire and what I see as a very strong masculine quality is being proactive and taking action in areas of life that you have control over, not sitting there and kind of just whining and complaining about stuff. And this goes for both sides, but I would say, um, obviously, there's one side wants to control wants to control me a little bit more than the other. On this
Well, I
type of
think,
stuff.
well, that's an interesting point. That's why I always thought the left kind of has a natural advantage in this struggle, is because the idea of generally speaking, for the most part, people on the right just kind of want to be left alone, and the leftists are by their nature want to control others. So
Right.
it's hard for a lot of people who are the idea of getting involved, being a busybody, getting involved, fight, usually there's a couple of things that are, hills that people on the right will die on, like the Second Amendment,
Right.
things like that. They're going to say, whoa, 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 no, that's you're not,
Yeah, that is actually very true. There's a certain type of personality that is not attracted to the idea of going to protests, going to rallies, who find that just basically agitating and doing things that are not. They may yield results in the political world, but they don't. It doesn't produce anything in terms of actual goods or services. It's not. They want to start a business or they want to be productive, whereas others, their entire life is built around just being an activist and getting someone else to do what they want them to do and coming up with all these creative ways that basically forces somebody into a corner one way or another. One way I think of that is the type of person who's going to lie down in the middle of a road and block traffic, thinking I can't think of even if it was for a cause I agreed with, I would still tell those people to get off the road because what they're doing is
people need to get to work, man.
yeah, it's a incredibly cowardly thing to do because you do it you win either way. You get to sit there and block people's traffic and make other people's lives miserable. And if they go to remove you, you get to play the victim when you're blocking traffic. But it's all about optics. You can start crying, or it looks bad to have a bunch of people with dressed in uniforms with guns picking you up and dragging you away. And if somebody runs over you, then you still look like the victim. Either way, it's somebody who's able to hold. I think this is what it is. They're able to control people and anyone who resists looks like the aggressor and you look like the victim. And that's what the angle, the strategy that's played. And I find it really disgusting because, for one, I have much more respect for a honest, open foe, somebody who just says, I don't, I'm your enemy. Like, I think like Genghis Khan and I think of all like the barbarians, they didn't pretend to be friendly to the people they were invading. They were just honest and frank. We're coming here to take over your cities, and we're not here to pretend to be your friend and then through treachery. I think that's the difference. Is I respect an enemy who just openly on some sort of open conflict over treachery, deceit, and subterfuge. I find that to be cowardly and not. But again, that works for certain types of people.
Wasn't that quote by Cicero about the enemy inside the walls is far
Oh
more
yeah,
dangerous than
yeah. So that Cicero quote about traitors. Yeah, traitors and people who are whatever you call them, fifth column type people. They're far worse than an honest enemy, because an honest enemy won't. First of all, they won't question your motives because they don't care. They're not trying to have an argument. They're not pretending to be your friend. And that's why I don't think that this is based on anything theologically, but so there's a reason why Dante put betrayers, mutineers, and traitors in the innermost circle of hell. You had Mordred betraying King Arthur. You had Judas Iscariot betraying Christ, and then you had Brutus betraying Julius Caesar. Yeah, like those are the types of people who betray the most basic concepts of character and virtue.
Yeah, so that's the ultimate evil in a way. To go back to the Dante's reference, because that was the lowest circle of hell. That's interesting point. Where do you, my view about politics is kind of like, it's frustrating because I live in Seattle, and as you know very well, it's extremely left wing, and being someone who's more right leaning, you're pretty much impotent because they don't even like run Republican candidates here for city council or mayor or anything like that.
No, it's kind of amazing. Even you watch. This is just purely from an objective point of view. Just looking at their politics, you have candidates who accuse each other of being, not sufficiently leftist, and when you have people accusing these people who would describe themselves as progressives, hardcore progressives on the Seattle City Council or something like that, accusing them of being Trump, basically Trump supporters or enablers.
Yeah, that was pretty. I saw that on the clip.
I don't think it even needs to be said. There is no right wing equivalent of this anywhere in the country. There is no. And people talk about specific candidate or specific council members who are openly socialist, but the thing is that labels. I've never been a one to really care about labels because the current Vermont governor, is a Republican, even though it's a far left state and it elected Bernie Sanders as senator. And so the label thing doesn't matter. It's ideas that matter and policies that people actually support. And so, yeah, if you're in Seattle, and that goes back to me growing up. I grew up Bellevue wasn't really that way. I don't think it's always been kind of I call it the younger brother of Seattle, where Seattle's doing stuff. Bellevue kind of is doing its own thing.
Bellevue is more like Bellevue is kind of where you go when you're rich and you get married and you have kids. That's kind of what Bellevue is.
Well, yeah, well, now it is. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about that. So I grew up for a couple of years. I was raised up until grade school on Main Street. Now, not the Main Street in downtown Seattle. I grew up on the Main Street that's over in a neighborhood called Lake Hills. And Lake Hills was for the lower and middle class people back then. And that's when houses were $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to buy. Those houses are now worth $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. And there was definitely, I would say, was also where a lot of new immigrants from other countries. So in the 90s, you had a strong Eastern European waves, and then you had other types of waves of different people coming in. And so the city's become much more ethnically diverse since then. But growing up in my area, it was really idyllic in terms of just like everything felt safe. I never felt like there was any danger. My parents never gave that. There wasn't a lot of helicopter parenting, as people would describe today. They just said, we're on a main street, just be careful for cars and all that stuff. But we would go out to the parks, and the parks were clean. Even today, Bellevue is mostly a clean area. And whenever I go back, I get a little bit of nostalgia for that type of life, and wish that I'd been able to afford to live there, because I still think, I think that's what kind of confuses, or not confuses, but is frustrating for us, is a lot of these areas. Politically, we don't agree with, but the areas are just beautiful, like aesthetically. The scenery's fantastic, and so you want to. You prefer.
Well, yes, no, I agree with that. But what inevitably happens, and like we've seen this happen in San Francisco, and now it's starting to happen in Seattle, is so you'll have a bunch of leftists come in, and they'll, there's a lot of money, like in the Bay Area, because they had all the tech firms. I think Google is based there. whatever. So huge amounts of money, and then they have incredibly high taxes, and housing prices were outrageous, so they got the property taxes on that. So that allowed all these left, and everybody's virtue signaling, so they voted all these leftists. And now you go through like the transit system in San Francisco,
Right.
and it's just, I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of these videos on YouTube. It's just so disheartening to see just drug addicts lined up shooting up in plain sight. And so it's the homeless problem. I mean, I think it's legal to defecate on the street now in San Francisco.
Yeah,
So
in that, and I definitely that's what I'm afraid is going to happen in the Seattle area. You know,
well, no, it is happening now. Like what?
right.
Because I see this daily. I live in I live in not downtown, but I live in South Lake Union is called the neighborhood here, and it's
Yeah,
very booming. It's kind of where Amazon is, and
right.
a lot of that, and of course there's a Whole Foods and all that kind of stuff. But there's homeless everywhere now, and it's instead of the city investing in what these people what really need is treatment, both for substance abuse issues and mental health disorders. Usually they have a combination of both. It's a multi-vector problem. I know it's not simple, but
Right.
just allowing them to set up these homeless encampments and not enforcing the law, literally let them turn parks into giant homeless shelters, which was what they have. There's a huge amount of crime that goes with that. I mean, I actually had a
Right.
homeless guy come into my apartment while I was home because he thought there was no one home.
Yeah, I think that's what really amazes me is that on one hand, you would say, purely from a pragmatic point of view, the first thing that you do if you start having a homeless problem, you have to say, okay, we have got to stop sending this signal out that people should people from homeless people from other cities should come here, or that more importantly other governments should send their people over here, which is exactly what they've been doing. There's obviously nobody who's going to cough up to it and admit it, but I've heard enough anecdotal evidence from people in my travels around the country over the last 10 years that that's the case. But you would say, okay, these people need to be off public property because this is for the people who pay taxes and who saved up. It's just a total lack of respect. If I'd say two ways that it's disrespectful to the people who live there and pay taxes and bought stuff. It's disrespectful by the government that runs it because it's their job to maintain the property that they control. We can get into the discussion of public property and all that stuff, but the idea that it's to be used as homeless encampments is complete nonsense. And it's also disrespectful by the people who tolerate this stuff, who think that it's okay. You got to just think. I, I almost want to direct, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this. I almost direct this at the people who live in that city who have the power to change things tomorrow if they wanted to. And it's almost like they see that as suffering. And this is all just anecdotal. I've talked to maybe two or three people, but who support the letting the homeless be on these parks. And it's almost like a sense of guilt that I have money and they don't, so I can't, who am I to judge or whatever. And that policy, it's really, I don't know. I don't understand the mentality. And especially when innocent people are getting hurt or attacked, how's that supposed to make people feel good about the fact that they tolerate that and that they are destroying property that that's there, that's supposed to be enjoyed by everybody. People are supposed to be able to take their families there and enjoy stuff, and instead they can't even. I've read emails sent to the city about college girls who are afraid to go to their campuses or walk outside their house because there's people accosting them or whatever. It's like, okay, how much are people going to tolerate?
Well, I thought that they would have done something by now, but apparently they won't. And I think there's the part of it is because the left is very effective at shaming those types of people. I mean, people like you and I, we really don't care if someone's going to call us a racist or a bigot or something phobic, or I don't really give a damn what these people think. But a lot of people do. They're worried about being socially ostracized. They're terrified of being getting a label, and that so they're kind of just they kind of keep silent because they're not because of the risk involved. And you know, you'll, even when they're saying, well, we got to do something about the homeless problem, they always have to preface it by, oh, but we're so, you know, we don't want to hurt. Well, of course not. That should go without saying. You don't have to keep saying that, but no, something has to be done. You're not really helping these people.
They keep assuming that the people who are making these accusations are the moral authority. Instead, notice everybody has a passive mindset. Somebody says you don't care about them. I would turn around and say, you don't get to tell me what I do and don't care about, and it's not up for you to decide, and you don't get to judge. And also, your policies aren't effective. If you want to solve the problem, one, signal the people who come here that they're not going to get free stuff, that they don't just get to load off of people here. And let's put that aside. Let's say you did support a program where these people would be given stuff. Then you have, okay, if you're going to take stuff from taxpayers, then you need to be off the street. You need to be in some place where you're getting medical treatment or drug treatment or whatever. But you don't get to take free stuff and then just go back on the street and basically having people subsidize your lifestyle. But they're also opposed to that as well, because one, we have to also understand there are people out there who do not want the problem going away, and they see more and more homeless as it's a problem, and that's part of their power is in seeing a problem and being able to use it as a justification to get more money and justify more funding. And I mean, think about it. If your whole business model is contingent on there being a homeless population, what incentive do you have to solve it? It's sort of like somebody owning a private prison. What incentive do they have to solve
They don't want an end to crime.
yeah, they don't want to end to crime. And so, and what's funny is the same people will point out, the same people who advocate for this homeless type situation where you have encampments and these people are being given free stuff, they'll also point out private prisons. And I would say, well, okay, that's not that's the same thing. You are incentivizing the problem to grow, and so but again, this is the attitude of most people that I've been coming across. I don't know, maybe the fact that people are just so busy, I couldn't say. It's just been frustrating to see that happen. And the fear is that it's going to spread over into Bellevue, and they're going to start having some of the same problems, because eventually it's going to become so saturated in Seattle that people are going to look for greener pastures. And there's just as much wealth on the east side as there is there. And I think the other part of the problem is that the citizenry is not allowed to do anything about it. So you get this weird anarcho tyranny situation in which the laws that should be enforced aren't, and the laws that shouldn't be enforced are. So this, municipal governments will enforce laws like this new straw ban or whatever it is, but they're not going to enforce laws about different stuff dealing with the homeless. They're just not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much where we are now. I mean, it's like it's a de facto law that you, yeah, and I know this kind of firsthand because I have a good friend of mine that's a deputy sheriff here. So, and just the horror stories he tells me about the way they're told to just stand down and do nothing, and they literally, it's heartbreaking for a cop to actually see a crime go on and not be allowed to do anything about it.
Did you read that story about the plummet, people basically resigning from the police department in Seattle?
No. Yeah, you should send that to me on Twitter privately.
Yeah. The Seattle Times, I think, did a story on how the morale in that department has gotten so low because, yeah, like you were just saying, they're not being allowed to enforce the law, but then also when they do enforce the law, they're being attacked by people in the city. And so I see two potential outcomes, and I really don't want to speculate on which one's going to happen, but at some point you're going to have something blow up where the people in the city, they're going to vote in candidates or put in people in place in those cities who their ideology is going to be, they'll say the same talking points and say whatever, but they're going to be, it's all going to be all about pragmatism. It's not going to be about ideology. It's going to be just about, we need to clean up the streets. We need to deal with the homeless problem. And we need to stop with all this stuff that's scaring away people or making them, or causing a lot of division within the city. And that's possibly something that we could see. I don't have a very firm grasp of a lot of people, especially the new people in Seattle. I just don't know what their thought is on this.
Well, I'm not really sure either, but this is gonna be where we ended because we are at time. It was great talking to you. For our listeners here, all the links to TJ's works, his Twitter, His personal website, his podcasts are in the description. Also look for him when that comes out, that article. I will also go back and edit it to from Terra House Magazine. I will put that in when that's out. Anyway, TJ, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah,
Everyone else, thank you. Take care. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, and subscribe.